Hello everybody, Namanjan coming right at you with a new tutorial with combat systems. Now if you haven't watched my previous tutorials, it's totally fine. This is going to be a tutorial on its own, but we're going to apply it to our previous material we made in our previous tutorials. Okay, so first to begin with our combat system, we're going to open Unity and we're going to add a new enemy. Now so we're going to go to a prefabs folder and take a skeleton fresh and drag it to our game scene. Now these prefabs are available on Unity Asset Store and they're for free and they're called Skeleton Pack. So first we're gonna go and rename our player, which was Skeleton Dark, to player, which I just did. And then we're gonna name our Skeleton Fresh to enemy just for our convenience. And we're gonna name our player, we're gonna tag our player as player, and you're going to go to your enemy and say add tag, and you're going to add a tag enemy, which I already did, and you're going to go to your enemy and say tag it to enemy. Okay, so first we're going to add, we want our enemy to, first let's make the rotation to 180 so it's facing towards us, and make our scale 222 so it's as big as us. So first, we want our enemy to chase us. So first, we're gonna make um, a script for our mob, and we're gonna name it mob because he's a mob. He's an NPC, and we're gonna click on mob, and we're gonna write some functions for him. So before we do anything, we're gonna add some variables. Gonna add a public float speed. This will define the speed. We're gonna have a public float range. So this is gonna say what is the range of his attacks. If he's a melee, it's gonna be small. If he's a range or mage, it's gonna be big. But for now, we're gonna do just melee, and we're gonna have let's hold on to this for now. So first, we're gonna make a void in range, and what this is gonna do is it's gonna check if our player is in range with our mob. But now what is going to be different is instead of void, we're going to return a bool. Now what a bool is basically another variable like float or int or any type. I'll give you an example. We're going to have public bool in range. And bool can be of two types. It can either be false or true. So depending on if it is false or true, we can work with this variable. So now what bool in range means is whenever we call the in range method, it's gonna return a value which is type bool. If this is too confusing for now, don't worry, you're gonna understand it later in this program. And by the way, I just realized we will need another variable called transform player, and this is basically gonna hold the transform of the player. So our mob is gonna have the position of our player, and we're also gonna have a public character controller. So with the help of our character controller, we will move our mob. So first, we're gonna construct the method in range, which is gonna check if our player is in range. If our player is in range, it's gonna return true. So whenever we call the method to check if it is in range and if the player is actually in range, it's gonna say true. But if it is not in range, it's gonna return false. And so what we're gonna say is if vector 3 dot distance between transform dot position and player dot position is less than range. We're gonna you have to just fill out complete that round brackets. We're gonna return true. I'm going to repeat this again. If the distance between the position of our enemy and the position of the player so the distance between the position of the enemy and the position of the player is less than the range of the mob, we're going to return true. So basically, if it is in range, we're going to return true. Else, we're going to return false. Now, a shorter way of doing this is just saying return vector 3 dot distance. Just copy paste this actually. So this is a shorter version of this whole statement. But for now, we're just going to put this because it's easier to interpret and understand. So now once we have got this, we should check if it is working. So debug.log in range. So basically, we're calling the in range method. So it's gonna check if in range, and depending if it's in range or not in range, it's gonna return true or false, and that's what we're gonna see in our debug in our console. But before that, we will need to set some of these variables. Let's set speed equal to 10 and range equal to 5.5, and we need to make a character controller so that we are able to move our mob. Even though we don't have any movement script yet, but we will soon have. And we're going to drag our character controller to over here. And we're going to drag our player over here so that it knows what the position of our player is at all times. So for now it says our player is not in range, but let's try move it. As we get closer, as it gets into range, we can see that it says true, but once it gets out of range, it says false. Let me demonstrate again. It says false, but as it gets closer, it says true. But if it gets out of range again, it's going to return false again. So let's make this range a little bit more appropriate. So let's try 1. And oops, sorry. It still says false. And as you can see, 1 is way too close. So we're going to try 1.5. And as you can see, 1.5 is way too far. And okay, so after some testing and finding out which range works out perfectly, I found out that 1.25 works out perfect. Now, depending on your In your scale, it might be different, so you might want to change it according to you. So we're gonna put it to 1.25. So now that we know that our in range method is working, we can continue on to build a chase method. As you can see in this, it says void chase because we're not gonna return anything. We're gonna return void, which is basically empty. And here we're gonna return a true or false. So that is why we need a bool. So in this chase method, what is gonna happen is we're first gonna know the player's. We're gonna get the player's position, and then we're gonna ask the transform to rotate to the player and then move towards the player. Very similar to our click to move scripts. So let's move on. We're gonna first say transform dot look at player dot position. So it says our transform, the mobs, the enemies transform dot look at the players, the variable over here, position. Let's see if that works. And nope. And that is because we don't actually call the method chase. And we don't need this anymore. We're gonna play. And as you can see, the enemy looks at us at all times. Now we want our enemy to move towards our position. So you're gonna say controller. You're gonna use our character controller over here to move the mob. Dot simple move. Transform. Dot forward times speed. So basically we're moving in the forward direction of the transform multiplied by our speed. Let's make our speed a little less than our player for convenience. Let's save everything. And as you can see, we have a mob chasing us. So now we're gonna add some animations to our mob. So first we're gonna have a public animation clip run and public animation clip idle. For now we're just gonna work with the run animation. So we're gonna say animation dot play run dot name. So basically, while we're chasing our player, we're gonna play the run animation, and we don't actually assign our animation. So we're gonna assign one now, and we're just gonna drag and drop. And there we go. As you can see, we have a run animation, but we have another problem. As you can see, our character controller still tries to move our character controller towards our player even though it is in range. So we have to tell our controller to stop moving if the enemy is in range with our player. I'll repeat that again. We need to stop the character controller from moving if the player is in range of the mob. So we're going to say only if the player is not in range, we're going to chase. So it's saying if the player is not in range, we're going to chase, but if the player is in range, else we don't do anything. I'll repeat that again. If the player is not in range, we're gonna chase it. As simple as that. Or else we're gonna play animation dot play idle dot name. So when when our character when our mob is in range with our character, it's gonna stop moving and we're gonna play the idle animation. And we should actually use crossfade for both of these so that it transitions smoothly. And as you can see, our player our mob conveniently follows us and stops at the right time. Okay. To make things look nicer, we can add a texture to our plane, which I will do at the end of the video because that is not on topic. So now that we have a chase method, we want attack method. So actually before we have attack method, we want a method that will enable the player to select our opponent. So for that, we need a mouse over function for our mob. 1 second. So we need so our mouse over function, what it basically is, it checks if our mouse is over the mob. I will demonstrate this in a minute. So we're gonna have a void on mouse over. So basically what this does is it detects if our mouse is over this mob. Let me demonstrate to you. As you can see, it does not show anything on the console, but the moment I put my mouse over this person, this mob, you can see that it says mouse is I over this mob, which is a typo. And as you can see again, the number increases. It keeps on calling the method as I put my mouse over the mob. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use this method to set our opponent to this mob. For that, we will need a script in our player saying we can name it a combat or we can name him fighter. So, and the reason I'm not using this in click to move because I want to have a separate script for combat system and a separate script for click to move. This is usually a good habit to separate out functionalities for your character. So now we're gonna have a public game object opponent. Notice that it's not a transform, it's a game object. Transform basically only returns you the position, rotation, and scale. But what the game object returns you is the whole game object. So I will have access to its transform, animation, mob, script, and character controller. The reason we need this is because later on we're gonna access the mob's health variable through the mob script. But that is for later on. We're not gonna worry about that now. And we're gonna make this public. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to our mob script. Okay, so now we're gonna go on our on mouse over. So when we move our mouse over the opponent, we want our opponent variable over here to be set to that mob. So on our mob class, we're gonna say on our on mouse over, we're gonna say player. So we're gonna call the player transform over here. Dot get component. So we're gonna get the component from our player object over here, and we want the fighter script because we want to change the opponent variable in our fighter script. So we're gonna say fighter, and then run bracket and say dot opponent. So basically, from our mob script, we're going to our player, and then going to our fighter, and in our fighter we're accessing the opponent variable, and we're setting it to this game object. So we're setting our the opponent of our player to this mob's game object. We're gonna save that, and we're gonna hope for no errors. Okay, so now to test if this works, we're gonna go to our fighter class, and we're gonna have a debug.log, and we're gonna log our opponents. And as you can see, for now our opponent is null, but once I once I put my mouse over to this opponent, it sets the opponent to this enemy. Now if you put in now if you put in multiple enemies, let's name them enemy 1, enemy 2, and we try to drag on them. As you can see, it says enemy. Sorry, I forgot to rename them. We have enemy 1, enemy 2, and as you can see, it says enemy and then enemy 2 and enemy 1 over there, enemy 1. So depending on which mob you put your cursor on, it's gonna give the respective mob's game object, which we need. Okay, so now what do we want to do with this game object? We basically want to attack this game object and reduce its health. Sorry, but as we're running really high on time, this combat system is gonna have multiple sessions, and I'm gonna explain more in the fourth session. So if you like my tutorials, please like my content, subscribe. It really helps me out. And I'm currently working on an RPG game, and I'm gonna soon upload some videos. So it would be really nice if you gave me some support and also some feedback by looking at those videos. Thank you very much, and goodbye.